welcome. I am Scarpalock, and this is City of Heroes on the Rebirth server. We are with Quintessence last, our level 42 brute who has 13.5 million XP earned, roughly, and about 800,000 to go. To get to level 43, 30 million influence, and we're on a story arc for Janet Kellum, who says, we've got to find out what Cray has done with the retired hero Night Fox. Not only is he in grave danger of becoming another unwilling donor for Cray's disgusting Revenant Hero project, he's also the only lead we have to the disappearance of Julianne Thompson. I'm beginning to suspect that girl may have fallen victim to some sort of Cray plot. Weird thing is, she disappeared years ago, back when Cray was just a European company of moderate means. So now we have to defeat 45 Cray. Well, isn't it lucky that it's been a few days? And I'm going to just auto-complete, because, I hate these defeat X missions. So now we'll call Janet, and she'll say, "Good work, Quintessence Last. The orders you found should lead us right to the facility where the Night Fox has been imprisoned. And now we're going to go rescue him in Brickstown." So we're right here by the train station, so we'll be able to wander right over there. Brickstown. So as we go, what I'd like to do is talk about. I've been listening to a podcast about D&D, and they've talked about a couple of things. I don't know if I'm going to get to them both or all three of them, whatever, today. But they started out talking about, and I'm going to switch this to Champions. It's a D&D podcast, so they were talking about it in terms of D&D. But I'm going to switch this to Champions and a bunch of other, I think, possible topics related to this concept. So they began by talking about alignment. So in Dungeons and Dragons, when you create your character, traditionally, you were to select an alignment for the character, and the alignments are on two different axes: the law chaos axis, with a lawful character being orderly and predictable and sort of rational and so forth, and a chaotic character being more random and maybe irrational, not following predictable patterns, things like this. And then the other axis would be evil and good, right? With evil people being murderers and killers, and good characters being those who protect the innocent and are moral. And you would choose where you were on both of these axes. So you could be a lawful good character, which probably most normal humans are pretty much most of the time acting in a lawful good way. Most of us don't purposely break the law, and most of us don't purposely try to hurt others. You could be chaotic evil, which would be acting in a very sort of random, selfish way, and just basically doing whatever you need to do to make yourself satisfied, and you don't care who stands in your way. You mow them down. It's all about you. And then you can have all sorts of things in between: neutral good, lawful evil, and so forth. And I don't want to get too much into the characterizations of the alignments per se. There are different ways to interpret them, and I don't want to get into that. And I think the fact that there are different ways to interpret them sometimes causes some of the issues. But what these folks were talking about was, what does alignment mean, and how is it supposed to be used? And Matt Colville also discussed this, and how people sometimes use alignment as a descriptive and sometimes as a proscriptive. So the difference being, if it's descriptive, it's just describing what your character is like. If it's proscriptive, it controls your character's behavior. So if you say that it's proscriptive, a lawful good character cannot break the law or do something evil. If it's descriptive, it's just, well, he generally doesn't, right? And so these two people who are DMs were talking about it and saying that it's descriptive. And what they argued was, for example, if your character's lawful good and you decide in this moment, I'm going to kill this character, the GM shouldn't step in and say, no, you can't do that, because your alignment says you're lawful good. Well, I'm going to sort of agree and disagree, right? I think that no, the DM shouldn't necessarily prevent it. And you shouldn't say, well, you have to do exactly what it says on your alignment all the time. But I would also argue, and I think Matt Colville did this as well, if it is descriptive, it needs to be accurate. Right? One thing that I would argue absolutely is that character sheets must be accurate. And when you play the game, you must do what it says on your character sheet. If you fail to do that, you are essentially cheating. If my character sheet says that I can only make one attack per round, and I make 2 attacks per round, that's considered cheating. So if my character sheet says that I'm lawful good and I act chaotic evil, how is that not also kind of cheating? And so I would argue that the character sheet needs to be accurate, and a player should be putting down what is the correct alignment for their character and then playing that character that way. You shouldn't be putting down, chaotic neutral and acting lawful evil. If you're going to be a lawful evil, then write that down on your character sheet. And I think to get away from the alignment argument, because there's all kinds of arguments in D&D about whether you should even use alignment. I happen to like alignment. One of the reasons I like it is it's very reminiscent of certain elements of Champions. So in Champions, every superhero has hundreds of points of powers. You have characteristics, which are sort of the physical description of your character: your presence, your body, your constitution, your comeliness, which is how attractive you are, your ego, your intelligence, your strength, your physical and energy defense, your stun, your endurance. These are the sort of physical descriptors of the character. And then you have powers and skills and talents that go in another section of the character sheet. Things like flight and punch or extra strength, or energy blast, flash defense, ego attacks, mind control, mind scan, darkness, any number of superpowers you can think of: flight, super leap, growth, density increase, shrinking, desolidification. These are superpowers that work a certain way as described in the rules, and you buy them with points. Well, in order to have points, you have to get the points from somewhere. Every character starts with 100 points for free because they're superheroes. But you need to build a lot more than 100 points can buy you. And the way you get more points is to give your character what are called character disadvantages: bad things, negatives, cons, things that, for lack of a better term, restrict your role-playing options. Nearly all disadvantages are roleplay and not mechanical. There are a few that are mechanical, like taking double damage from magic or something like that, but the majority of disadvantages are roleplay disadvantages, such as psychological limitations, like having a code against killing, a total commitment to do that, or protective of innocence, or reckless, or having a reputation for being a liar, or having a dependent non-player character, somebody like Lois Lane, who's always getting into trouble and making Superman have to get her out of trouble. She doesn't impose any mechanical disadvantage on him in combat, but she poses a role-playing disadvantage on him because a villain like Lex Luthor could threaten her, and even though Superman's invulnerable, Lois Lane isn't, and if he throws her off a building, Superman's going to have to stop trying to capture Lex Luthor and go rescue Lois Lane. And so there are all of these disadvantages. And the Champions writers have been very clear in all of the early editions from 1 to 4, or even 5. I haven't read past 5 really, and I know 4 the best, and 2. Any disadvantage that doesn't disadvantage the character isn't worth any points. And what this effectively means is that if you take a psychological limitation, you are required to play out that psychological limitation in the game. You are not free in Champions to take the psychological limitation code against killing and then ignore it and murder people. Okay? And code against killing is similar to being lawful good. You're simply not free to ignore the fact that it says code against killing on your character sheet in Champions. And if you do ignore it, the game master will do something about it, or should. And the game master has a couple of options. He could say, you need to erase that from your character sheet and use the next 20 points of experience you get to buy it off. He could say you need to erase it from your character sheet and take 20 points off your character right now. Find 20 points somewhere on your character sheet and balance that character sheet right now, because you're not playing out the code against killing. It's not a disadvantage to you, and therefore it isn't worth any points if you don't play it out. Alternatively, he could say, I want you to change this psychological limitation to something else of the same value, 20 points, but it can't be code against killing because you aren't role-playing that out. And I think the same thing goes with alignment. If you write lawful good on your character sheet and then you start murdering people, the GM should say, as Colville talks about, you're not allowed to put lawful good on your character sheet because it is not an accurate description of your character's personality, behavior, and obviously alignment. In Champions, for example, you're not allowed to ignore your dependent NPC. And I actually had a player one time where I killed off his dependent NPC. Now, I warned him, right? I warned him a lot, out of character, out of game. He had a dependent NPC, and the dependent NPC was a liability, and he kept trying to ignore the liability. So, there'd be a combat, and the villain's got the dependent NPC under some sort of threat, and the player just ignored it, figuring, the GM won't kill this NPC, and I'll just attack the villain. And he wasn't playing it out, and I said, you can't do that. You can't just ignore your DNPC. Oh, I wasn't ignoring him. I knew he'd be safe, right? So we went through several rounds of this. I then did some in-character threats to the DNPC and kind of to try to demonstrate to the player that I was serious, and he ignored me. He just did not want to role-play out his dependent NPC. So I killed it. I had a villain throw it off a cliff, and it died. And then the player's like, well, what do I do now? Can I get another DNPC? And I said, no, you need to buy it off. And he said, I don't want to buy it off. Can I just have another one? And I said, no, because you've proven to me that you're not willing to roleplay this disadvantage. And remember, a disadvantage that isn't disadvantageous to you is not worth any points. So he had to spend his next, whatever it was, 10 or 12, 15, whatever it was, XP, buying off that disadvantage. And he wasn't happy about it, because it meant that his character was worth less total points, fewer total points, than the other characters in the game. But those other characters, their players weren't ignoring their disadvantages, right? So when it comes to a role-playing game, the DM shouldn't, or GM shouldn't necessarily prohibit any particular roleplay that the players want to get into with their characters. But as a player, you're supposed to roleplay the way it says on your character sheet that you will. And if you fail to do that, then the character sheet must be changed so that there's an alignment between how you're playing the character and what it says on the character sheet, right? Just like in Champions, you're not allowed to roll 20 dice 6 for damage when you only have a 10 dice 6 attack, right? You're also not allowed to ignore your psychological limitation, protective of innocence, and completely ignore the fact that the villain's threatening innocence and go attack somebody else. You have to play out your disadvantages. If you don't, then they aren't disadvantages and they aren't worth any points. And I think the same thing is true. Alignment isn't worth points, but I think the same thing is true for alignment. Yes, you can play your character however you want, and no, you shouldn't be completely restricted on how you play based on alignment, but your alignment needs to be an accurate reflection of how your character behaves. And if it's not, then you need to change it so that it is an accurate reflection of how your character behaves. And I think that if the alignment is an accurate reflection of how characters behave, there actually isn't anything wrong with the alignment system. I think the reason people don't like it is because a lot of players want to just be chaotic neutral. They just want to, and even with chaotic neutral, I don't know that they play right. What they want to do is be able to do whatever, have their character do whatever is the most optimal thing to do in every situation, right? Well, it's more optimal to ignore the innocence here and straight on attack the villain, so that's what I'm going to do. And I don't like it that my psychological limitation is preventing me from doing that, so I'm going to ignore that, right? And when the GM comes along and says, well, excuse me, but you have a psychological limitation, it says protective of innocence. Why are you attacking this villain when the other one is threatening innocence with a bomb? Why aren't you trying to save the innocence? Right? And the players get annoyed when the GM does that because they want to do the optimal thing. And I think we have to be very careful about ignoring what it says on the character sheet or considering what it says on the character sheet to somehow be a hindrance to your roleplay. It's not. The disadvantages, and it even says this in the Champions rules, the disadvantages are the most important part of the character because anybody can shoot laser beams out of their eyes, fly, and punch things really hard. What makes Superman Superman is his personality. The fact that he won't kill, that he doesn't lie. And this is even done in the Superman movie, right? Superman is tricked by Lex Luthor into one disadvantage, susceptibility to kryptonite, and he's in a swimming pool, drowning, and Miss Tessmacher goes to save him. And she says, I'll only save you if you promise to save. There's 2 missiles, one going to California, one going to New Jersey. She says, you got to stop the missile going to New Jersey first because my mother lives in New Jersey and I don't want her to die. And Superman says, but Lois and Jimmy are in California. And she says, no, you've got to rescue my mother first. If you promise, I believe you because you always tell the truth. By the way, Superman, psychological limitation, always tells the truth. Reputation for telling the truth. He's probably got about 35 points worth of disadvantages of being a truth teller. So now his player has to play that out. He can't say, okay, Miss Tessmacher, I'll go to New Jersey, and then when Miss Tessmacher throws the kryptonite away, the player says, nah, I'm going to California. Right? As a game master, you just say, wait a minute, hold on. You have a psychological limitation that says you always tell the truth. And by the way, you have a reputation for being truthful. So if you do this, your reputation's gone, right? You're going to have to, buy a different reputation for being a liar or something like this, or buy it off. And actually in Champions, and I'll talk about this, I want to mention this too, to violate a psychological limitation, you have to make an ego roll. And if you have a total commitment to it, you have to make it at penalties, I believe. It's been a long time since I've done it, but I know you have to make an ego roll. You have to make an ego check. It's like a willpower check to overcome your psychological limitations. You can't just do it. So the GM would have to say, well, first of all, you're going to need to make an ego roll to actually not follow your word. And then you're going to have to buy off your reputation because Miss Tessmacher is going to go tell everybody you lied to her, and your reputation is going to be shot. Right? So you're going to have to buy off the limitation, and you're going to have to make an ego roll anyway. And because it says in your character sheet that you're such an honest guy that you have a reputation for it, and you've got a psychological limitation. You're getting 35 points for being an honest guy. You can't just now go, okay, I'm not going to be honest. Right? And so I think it's really important to make sure that what it says in your character sheet is what you actually play. And again, it's not, yes, it is imposing limitations, boundaries, if you will, on what you're allowed to roleplay about your character, but that's supposed to be the fun of it. If you can just play any old random thing, that's not roleplaying. You know, I have a really good friend who likes to say, I think not entirely truthfully, because we didn't just do literally any old random thing, but he likes to say that when we were kids and we were first learning to play D&D, we didn't roleplay. Because we just kick down the door and beat up whatever was in the next room and get its treasure and move on to the next thing. And we didn't really worry a lot about the personalities of those characters in D&D. Well, that's the same thing as ignoring your psychological limitations or your alignment or whatever because it's not convenient to play it out. Roleplay necessarily involves boundaries. Your character can only do what it says on the character sheet. And what you're supposed to be doing as a role player isn't just doing whatever, but doing the in-character thing. In fact, Matt Colville has defined roleplay as when you have the character do something that you, the player, wouldn't do. Okay? My character is not a liar. I, the player, recognize it would be very expedient to lie here. But what would Superman do? Well, Superman, it turns out, if you look at the best Superman role player ever, Christopher Reeve, right? Superman kept his word. Is that what Christopher Reeve would have done? Maybe not. Is it what Richard Donner, the director, would have done? Maybe not. But they said it's what Superman would do. And what you see on the screen isn't what Christopher Reeve or Richard Donner or Gene Hackman would do. It's what Superman and Lex Luthor would do. And that's what role-playing is all about. And so, getting back to alignment, you're saying, well, you know, it's whether it's proscriptive or descriptive. It says in your character sheet that you have a lawful good character. And that implies certain things about the behavior of this character, that you're going to follow the law, that you're not going to murder people, that you'll behave in a moral way, follow the golden rule, as it were. And it's not really an ambiguous sort of a definition, right? Because lawful good is kind of the way we define morality in the real world, and you're just going to behave that way. If that's what it says in your character sheet, that should be what you roleplay, because that's what you wanted when you wrote up the character. If you didn't want to do that, you should have given your character a different alignment. And so I don't necessarily think it is restricting to a player to say, here's the alignment you picked, play it out. Okay? You decided on that alignment, you wrote it out, you chose it, now play it. Right? And it's not, harming your ability to roleplay by insisting that you roleplay what it says in your character sheet. These are the boundaries that we've decided on as players and GM, and the challenge of roleplay is to play within those parameters and solve the problems presented to your character by playing out your character rather than yourself. Right? Yes, I know that's what you would do, but what would Quintessence last do here? Okay? And that's what roleplay is all about. So I don't actually... I think that a lot of people who have problems with alignment are... Actually, they don't have any problem with alignment per se. What they have is a problem with restrictions on their roleplay. And I think that that's a false... red herring. It's a false thing to worry about, because, literally by definition, roleplay is the restrictions. Right? If you just do anything, you're not role-playing. Right? Roleplay has parameters, it has restrictions. Your character disadvantages and champions limit what your character can do. You have a secret identity. Now you have to roleplay you're protecting that secret identity. It's going to limit what you can do. You might have to blow a couple of phases of combat trying to hide and change costume and then come back into battle. And what they say in the Champion's Rules is, yes, that's inconvenient, but it's worth the inconvenience for the genre feel of a character who has to duck into a phone booth, change clothes, and then come back out. Right? That feels so superhero that, or if it's Wonder Woman, you have to go around behind the shed and then spin around and then come back out within your costume. And that's going to delay you. It's going to take a couple of phases when you could have been in combat. Right? But instead of being mad that you don't get as many attacks as everybody else, well, it's role play. You're role playing, changing into your costume. You should enjoy that. Right? That's what role playing is all about. And those limitations are part of the character and how the character is portrayed. Right? So, after all, you think about it, if you watch the 1970s Wonder Woman TV show, what's the most patented thing about that show? She spins around to change costume. She does it 2 or 3 times an episode. There's a theme song that they play a little bit of every time she turns around. She does it from the very first episode to the very last for 3 straight seasons. By the way, it was Linda Carter's idea, apparently, to do the spin. And it's like the most iconic thing about her. So why wouldn't you want to roleplay something like that about your character? Now, that does mean you might get a couple less action phases in combat because you're busy spinning and you have to go behind the shed to do it. And so you've got to do a full move to get, or half move to get behind the shed. I think it's a full phase action to change costumes, and then a half move to come out. So you're wasting minimally 2 phases, possibly 3, depending on how far away you have to go to find a hiding spot. And you have to behave in a way that protects your secret identity, so you can't Like when it's maybe very essential to do, you can't just start throwing out your blasts while you're in your street clothes. Diana Prince couldn't just pull out her lasso and lasso somebody in front of Steve Trevor, or he would have found out that she was Wonder Woman and she was keeping that a secret. Now, why she had to keep that a secret isn't really explained in the show because, heck, they were just like, it's a superhero, they have secret IDs, that's what we're going to do, right? But the point is that that wasn't making Wonder Woman worse as a character or ineffective as a character. It's part of the roleplay. When I played Supergirl in Champions, I played actual Supergirl from pre-Crisis. She has a code against killing, she has protective of innocence, and she doesn't want to fatally hurt people because she's Supergirl. And so, what I used to do, and this drove many of the other players nuts because it was suboptimal. And I think I've mentioned this before. I would start every battle, whatever enemies I was fighting, she would do a like 3/4 strength. She had 50 strength. She could do 10d6. She would do like a 7 die 6 pulled punch. A pulled punch is harder to hit with, but it does full stun but less body. And basically, statistically, this would mean she would do no more than 3 or 4 body punching somebody, and most people have about a 2 PD. So the most she could do is about 1 or 2 body to a normal person who has no defense, right? And she would do that first to make sure that she wasn't attacking someone who had no shields or armor, right? Because you can't always tell how much defense somebody has. So she would do her pulled punch. And if that didn't really do anything, she would do a full strength pulled punch. And if that didn't really do anything, then she would finally start doing her full strength attacks. I would slowly escalate the power level. So we're like half a combat turn, which is a long time in Champions, into it before Supergirl, who was the most powerful character in terms of the damage output on the team. The other guys were all 9d6, I was 10d6. This is why the GM allowed it, because on average she wasn't more powerful because she was using her weak attacks to begin. He and I had talked about this before we started. And the other players are like, but use your full attack. These are supervillains. You know they can take it. I'm like, I know as a player, but Supergirl doesn't know. And she's got to check. And again, this is my point. What would the hero do? What would the character do? So, why? Well, she had these various disadvantages on her character sheet that I interpreted to mean that she would not do a full strength punch to a mortal, because a full strength punch from her could put you in the hospital, right? You do 10d6, you roll a little above average, you roll 12 body on 10d6, which you could potentially do without too much trouble, just a couple of 6s and no 1s. You just did 12 body to somebody who, if it's a normal person, only has 2 defense. They're at 0 body and dying, right? And even if she does the average of 10, she just did 8 body to somebody, you've crippled them. They are in the hospital, and they will be in the hospital for a couple of weeks. You basically just completely broke their jaw. They're not going to be able to talk for 2 weeks or whatever. Maybe you broke their neck and they're paralyzed. I mean, it's bad, right? It's a lot of body damage. And so she's not going to do that to somebody unless she knows they can take it. That's not hampering my roleplay. That is the roleplay. Yes, it makes her less efficient in combat. Who cares? The game isn't about combat, it's about role-playing. Yes, lots of combat in a superhero game, but the point of Champions is role-playing, and the point of D&D is role-playing. So you shouldn't think of the alignment that you wrote down on your character sheet, or the psychological limitations or disadvantages that you put on your character sheet as preventing you from role-playing your character. They're the things you're supposed to be role-playing. Right? You made up a lawful good character, go ahead and play him lawful good. It's not harming your roleplay. It's not constricting your freedom. It's giving you the freedom to play this character properly, the way you wrote it down. So, I fundamentally disagree with this idea that alignment is only descriptive and you don't have to actually follow it. It is descriptive, but you do have to follow it because it's what your character's supposed to be like. You wrote it down. Right? Otherwise, it's equivalent to saying, I'm going to write down that my character's an elf, but roleplay that he's a dwarf. Well, then why'd you write down that he's an elf? Right? If you wanted to roleplay as a dwarf, then write down that he's a dwarf. Or I'm going to I'm going to make a halfling who's 3 feet tall, but I'm going to roleplay that he's 6 feet tall. Unless you're playing somebody who's insane, which is, a valid thing to roleplay if everybody in the table is okay with it. That doesn't make any sense. Play a giant, right? They are tall. So, yeah, I mean, my feeling is there should be a synergy, an alignment, to excuse the pun, between what it says on a character sheet and how you have that character act in game. Just like if you write something in a background, even if there's no statistic involved, if you write something in a background, that should be accurate to the character, right? So Superman came from the planet Krypton, and you write that in the background. When the GM then has somebody call Superman an alien, you can't go, no, he's not from Krypton. He's from Earth. Not in roleplay, but out of character. You say, no, GM, don't do that. I'm roleplaying that this character isn't. He's actually from Earth. He was born on Earth. Well, but it says you came from Krypton in your background. Why does your roleplay not match what it says in your background? All of these things have to, again, excuse the pun, but align, right? You should be roleplaying in conjunction, in coordination with what it says on the character sheet. And what it says on the character sheet should reflect what you're role-playing. If you decide in the middle of play that this psychological limitation doesn't work, then you need to have a conversation with the GM about how you would buy it off, such as, my character is going to go see a psychiatrist, and over the course of several game sessions, several months of game time, he's going to stop having a phobia of spiders. Okay, maybe we can do that, and you buy off with experience. But you can't just put down phobia of spiders, and then when the GM attacks with Shelob from Lord of the Rings, your champion's character goes, yeah, I don't care, it's a spider, I'm not afraid of it, and just attacks. That's not what you're supposed to do. In fact, in Champions, you're really not allowed to do that, because then you're not playing your disadvantages, and you're required to play your disadvantages. That's part of the game. And not only is it part of the game, you should want to play them. A phobia of spiders, you wrote that down. You chose to have a character who has a fear of spiders. Why aren't you role-playing that? You should, right? In D&D, I made up a character, never got to play her, but I made up a bard whose family got ambushed when they were like resting against a cliff in the rain. And she now, I wrote in her background, she will not camp against a sheer surface like that. If the party, and I figured at some point the party's going to try to do that, and she's going to be like, nope, I'll go camp over there. She won't do it, and you guys need to come with me. And yeah, it's raining. Let's just sleep under these trees over here away from the cliff face. I'm not going anywhere near that cliff face, right? If you write that in the background, you have to role play it. I can't write that in the background, and then when the GM says you guys are up against a cliff face, I go, yeah, so what, whatever, my character goes to sleep. Then why did you write that in the background? So there needs to be a concordance, an agreement between what it says on a character sheet and how you play the character. That's part of the role-playing game. In fact, I'd say that's almost all of the role-playing game. Otherwise, you're just playing yourself or just randomly playing. That's not role-playing. That's just kind of gaming. Anybody could do that. And it's not role-playing. At least that's my opinion. Okay, let's call our contact. Janet, who says, so the girl we've been looking for has been dead for more than 10 years. That's a real shame, Quintessence Lass. A real shame. I'll break it to her mother. Maybe I can pull some strings to get Julianne's body shipped back to the States quickly. That way she can be buried in her family plot. We're getting close to toppling Cray. I can feel it. Take all the enhancements you can use. Okay. So she says, I just got word from Julianne's mother. According to her, that body that was buried under Julianne's name wasn't hers at all. Wasn't Julianne's at all, because otherwise it sounds like it wasn't her name at all. Bad writing. Now that may just be the grief talking. After years of hoping for her return, Mrs. Thompson may not want to face the fact that her daughter's been gone all along, but it got me thinking. I've got a hunch about who that body might belong to, Quintessence Lass. Now I just need you to check it out. All right, well, we've completed this episode. It's 34 minutes, so I think we're going to stop here. And we'll pick up, I may continue this topic again. There's a little more I want to say about consent and roleplay by consent and how that works in the future, because this was part of the same podcast I was listening to. But we'll do that another time. Until next time, folks, I am Scrapperlock, This has been City of Heroes on the Rebirth server.